A generous city. I mean, what is a generous city? You've heard of generous grandmothers, generous houses, generous bottoms, maybe. But a generous city, I mean, aren't cities just places where full of self-maximising individuals? I mean, I've lived in South London, where the definition of a generous city was to leave your car parked in Peckham and come back in an hour and find the windows weren't smashed in. But I do believe Wellington's a bit different. We have amazing open space. We're here today on the waterfront, and great parks to be in when it's not raining or freezing with the wind. But we have access to people, which I think is second to none from any city I've been in. We can pretty much get hold of anyone with a legitimate reason at any level of society. I love the fact that I can have meetings in one of our great cafes where we're sitting, talking to somebody who's a multi-millionaire property owner, and then turn to the next table and have a conversation with someone who's just come out of art school, keen to talk about their next project. We don't have many exclusive places, I guess. We also, I think it's the kind of place, Wellington, where you might be handed a parking coupon with 2 hours still left on it from somebody who's just left that space. And then maybe next week you'll do the same for someone else. I think it's pretty special, and it's also the place that has been calling itself absolutely positively Wellington for 23 years. I mean, something's going on. It's kind of loopy and great. I'd like you to help me right now imagine that this city, whether it's Wellington or another city, is an organism. An organism that could be a piece of algae or a more sophisticated primate, but it's an organism that breathes and consumes and defecates. It moves, it senses. And together we're all part of this organism. And whether or not the organism is a parasite on its environment or in relation to each other, whether we operate parasitically or symbiotically is kind of up to us in terms of how conscious we are. And I believe that generosity is an indicator of consciousness. So cities are these places that now over 50% of the world people are inhabiting. So more and more people want to be in cities rather than our rural hinterland. And in New Zealand, 86% of us are living in a city. So there's something very attractive, obviously, to people about being in this place. They want to connect and hook up. And yet, we experience in the middle of many cities around the world right now a kind of a dead zone. There's a place where buildings that were intended to be something, a place for some kind of exchange, have no longer retained that purpose. The number of vacancies, the retail vacancies in Wellington is up to 10%, and has been for a few years. In the UK, it's around 14%. So there's something that's not going on quite right. You could say that it's because we all do a lot of things online now, and that's true. We don't need to shop the same way with our food or our clothes. We don't need to quite go to the banks and the post offices like we used to. So we don't need to go into town. But there's also a little bit of an issue around supply and demand, and that you might have heard Economics 101, the idea that if there's a steady supply of these places or commodities, that price will drop according to a decreased demand. But that's not happening, actually, in property. So it's not just in the residential sector, it's in the commercial sector too. And a lot of people are moving to other parts of the city to share their businesses outside the centre. But what if we actually considered these places as opportunities for other kinds of exciting exchanges, not just commercial ones? We hear from social scientists that isolation is a bit of an issue for people in the city. And I know I've experienced as a mother of young children a few years back wanting to come into Wellington and be part of the hubbub that is the city. And yet not wanting just to meet somebody in a cafe and paying another $5 to stay in that warm space. If it's a cold day, where can we go to actually have meaningful dialogue with other members of the city? The public libraries and the city and the galleries are amazing, but actually I want to have conversations with people, and if I'm not working in the city, where are the places to go? This isn't just an issue for parents, it's also an issue for retired people, for people who are new immigrants to the city, for students. Anybody who's not perhaps working the office life, and many of us with our changing work habits are not. Social scientists talk about bumping spaces, the need for bumping spaces. And these are places where you can meet people who are different to you, different age, stage, different income level. And this is surely what we're coming to the city to do, is to connect with people who are different to us. We want divergent as well as convergent experiences. Well, 2010, as the global financial crisis was beginning to hit Wellington, with my dear friend Mark Amery, we decided to establish something called Letting Space. It was a project that was really trying to address these issues of creating new spaces for people to be, and also address, through art, environmental and economic crises. We asked several artists who we knew to be thinking and concerned about issues, and we launched several projects. The Free Store, some of you may remember, was a fantastic event in a derelict building near the CBD in Ghuznee Street. We took over this building and created a place where all the waste from the supermarkets that was deemed no good for sale, but in fact was perfectly edible, was distributed along the shelves. It was an aesthetic experience. People felt dignified by this. It wasn't a food bank. And we basically exposed, I suppose, the level of waste in the city. It was a runaway success, and I'm glad to say the project still continues on in other guise with the youth group running it. Down the road in Taranaki Street, a new apartment building with a brand new retail showroom had not been rented out for 2 years, and we proposed to those landowners a showroom promoting the virtues of living on Mars when this planet got too hard. And people, as they came in, were asked what would they do for this new colony? What makes them good prospective pioneers? As we got to know more people in the city, we were approached several times by property owners who wanted to share their love with us. And this is what's exciting. We got to be known. One of these is 19 Tory Street, which is a hub of extraordinary young dialogue. Places, 250 exhibitions, book launches, discussions about democracy, discussions about anarchy, discussions about knitting have taken place in 2.5 years at the space, all because of the generosity of this property owner. We've also established a brokerage for other people's ideas so that we can provide access. And in an empty bank, these guys created an amazing place where you could deposit your moods. 2,000 people came in and drew their moods and had them validated by the tellers. It was beautiful. It was true bumping spaces. Last year, when we celebrated the Marriage Amendment Act, we had the opportunity to broker a space right next to Parliament. When same-sex marriage was going to be allowed, the group invited anybody to come in and try on a wedding dress. And they were involved in discussion about what do relationships and partnerships and marriage really mean. A lot of people came back on a daily basis. So it's been a pretty phenomenal ride. We're still running this brokerage, and we think there's a future in it because people want to connect and they don't want to just do it through commercial exchange. It's not always easy to be a generous landlord or a generous person. Sometimes generosity can kind of bring up issues of control. And sometimes you might feel you're taken advantage of. Sometimes property owners don't want to have their private space being taken over into the public commons. But I believe that, that generosity can be bounded well if you're a bit nervous about it. The people who have contributed their properties have also got long-term visions and can see that generosity begets generosity. It's for the sake of the city. They also are open to being asked. And this is one of the things I'm learning too, is that we have to be able to ask favours to create a generous city, and we also have to be able to allow other people to ask favours of us. And if you might be sitting there thinking, look, I don't have anything to really give. I don't have any money. I don't have any property. What's this to do with me? And I just want to tell you a story about my friend Te Uratahi Waikiri Peru. She comes from Taranaki. And she and I were in a city, a far side of the world. And we're going to a Sophie Jerram. It's a ceremonial meeting house. And we arrived at this place one evening as dusk was settling, and we saw a whole lot of people outside. We wanted to get through, and we came up closer to the space and recognised that they were women mostly, and they were all begging. And I reached into my pocket thinking, oh, I'll give some money and get through. And instead, my friend Te Uratahi, she sized up the group and she identified one of the women who was the oldest. In Maori parlance, that would be the kuia. And she took this woman by the shoulders and she held her nose against this woman's in a hongi. And we took a deep breath, and all of us, in sort of silent surprise, stood back, and the group parted and let us through. And I knew then that what it was to dignify someone without money changing hands. And I know that we can all be part of this city, that when the 8 billionth person turns up, our organism will be healthy because we're living more symbiotically. And I want to thank you for the part you've played and will play in creating a generous city. Thanks.